Even as a child, Kola's eyes carried the fire of a dreamer. He'd watched the landlord's son ride past on a shiny bicycle and whisper to himself, "One day they will look up to me." His mother would laugh softly, pressing his cheek. "Dream, my son," she'd say, "but never forget, even the wind bows before the gods." But Kola never cared much for proverbs or prayers. He believed the world belonged to those who worked harder than the gods themselves. When his father died from a fall on the palm tree, the villagers gathered under the big iroko tree to mourn. The priest poured libation and muttered ancient words of comfort, but Kola's heart was hardened. "If your gods could save him, why didn't they?" he snapped. From that day, the boy who once fetched water for the shrine began to laugh at the very gods who had watched him grow. Years passed. Kola left the village with nothing but an old bag, a mind sharper than a razor, and a determination that burned hotter than the sun. He studied by candlelight, slept on classroom floors, and sold scraps in the city to pay his fees. Every challenge only sharpened his hunger. And when opportunity came, through a small oil contract no one else believed in, Kola struck gold. One success led to another. Soon he was running oil fields, owning skyscrapers, and funding tech startups across Africa. His name filled headlines. His face adorned magazine covers. Kola Adewale, the young lion of Africa. But with every dollar earned, his humility faded. He no longer prayed in the mornings. He laughed whenever his mother mentioned gratitude or faith. "Mama," he'd say, flashing his diamond watch, "you see this? This is my God. Hard work and money. Those are the only spirits I believe in." When she died, he built a golden tomb in her honor, not from love, but pride. The inscription read, "Here lies the woman who raised a god among men." At his mansion in Lagos, fountains spat wine instead of water. He threw parties that lasted for days, with politicians and celebrities at his table. Helicopters hovered above his estates like obedient birds. And whenever anyone mentioned the gods of the village, Kola would burst into laughter. "If they're real," he'd say, raising his glass, "tell them to strike me down now. Let's see if their thunder can reach my penthouse." The crowd would laugh and Kola would smile, a man too rich to fear the unseen. Yet deep inside his ancestral village, the wind began to whisper his name differently. The elders said the gods do not rush, but when they rise, even kings tremble. And one moonless night, as Kola sat on his balcony staring at the glittering skyline, a sudden chill ran through the air. Somewhere far away, a rooster crowed, not at dawn, but at midnight. The ancestors had heard enough. Years before the cars, the skyscrapers, and the fame, a little boy once held his grandmother's wrinkled hand as they walked down a narrow path through the thick bushes of Ajibade village. The air smelt of rain and palm wine, and the crickets sang like a hidden choir. At the end of the path stood the old shrine of Ogun, the god of iron and fortune. The clay walls were cracked and the wooden idol's face was half eaten by termites, but Kola's grandmother bowed before it with reverence. She placed a small calabash of palm wine on the ground and whispered, "Kola, my child, remember this. When the gods bless you, never forget to pour libation to thank them. Those who mock the heavens never build houses that last." Kola nodded then, but even as a child, he didn't fully understand. He only saw an old woman talking to a statue. That was many years ago. Now, the same boy had become a man who owned the city. He no longer walked barefoot. His shoes cost more than his grandmother's entire hut. He no longer knelt before any shrine. The only thing he bowed to was money. So when the village elders traveled all the way to Lagos to visit him, they were made to wait 3 hours in the heat outside his mansion gates. They wore faded traditional clothes, holding a woven basket filled with kola nuts and a letter of honor. Finally, Kola stepped out, dressed in a white designer agbada, surrounded by armed guards and camera flashes. The eldest of them, Pa Ogunlana, spoke with trembling respect. Kola Adewale, son of Adewale the palm wine tapper, we have come to remind you of your roots. The gods have favored you greatly. The festival of Ogun is near, and the village seeks your help to renew the shrine and bless the land. The billionaire smiled, sipping his imported champagne. Festival of what? Of Ogun, the god who opens paths. Kola laughed loudly, cutting him off. Old man, I opened my own path. Tell your gods I don't owe them a kobo. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. Pa Ogunlana tried again, softly. My son, pride is the enemy of grace. The gods, Kola waved his hand dismissively. Enough. If your gods are that powerful, tell them to come collect money from me themselves. The compound fell silent. The guards chuckled nervously. The elders stood frozen, shamed and speechless. One of them whispered under his breath, "He laughs at thunder as if it cannot find him." That night, as they walked away into the dark streets, the wind began to rise. Palm trees swayed, though there was no storm. And from afar, thunder grumbled softly, not in anger, but in warning. Inside his mansion, Kola raised another glass of champagne, unaware that the same gods he mocked were listening. In the stillness of the night, a shadow passed over the moon, and the gods marked his name. The sun hung low that evening, bleeding gold across the skyline of Lagos. At the gates of Kola Adewale's mansion, the world shimmered with luxury, marble floors, guards in black suits, and cars that looked like moving mirrors. But among the glitter and noise stood a strange, barefoot old man. His white robe was torn, his staff chipped, his hair gray as ash. He looked wildly out of place, like a ghost wandering through a city that had forgotten its roots. The guards approached, frowning. "Baba, you can't be here. Move along." But the man's eyes burned with something beyond human. "I have not come for you," he said softly. "I came for the one who mocks the gods." The guards laughed, thinking he was mad. But before they could touch him, Kola himself appeared at the balcony above, his silk robe gleaming, a glass of wine in hand. "What's all this noise?" The old man lifted his gaze. "Kola Adewale, son of Adewale the tapper. Do you remember the shrine where your grandmother prayed for your destiny?" Kola frowned, his amusement fading slightly. "Who are you?" "A messenger," the priest replied, his voice trembling but firm. "The gods have watched your pride rise higher than your towers. They say your laughter echoes in their sleep. Even the gods who rest will wake to humble a proud man." The wind seemed to pause. The guards exchanged nervously. But Kola burst into laughter, the kind that echoed through marble walls and chandelier lights. "Tell your gods to stay asleep then, because when they wake, they'll find nothing left to rule." The priest's eyes dimmed with sorrow. He raised his hand slowly toward the sky. "So it is spoken. When a man becomes deaf to wisdom, thunder must teach him to listen." Before anyone could respond, the old man turned and walked away barefoot, his staff tapping the marble like a heartbeat fading into silence. Kola stared after him for a moment, then shrugged. "Superstitious nonsense," he muttered, raising his glass. "Tonight, we celebrate life, not fear." That night, his mansion lit up with music and laughter. Champagne poured like rivers, and the world danced under his command. But far away, beyond the glittering city, thunder rolled over Ajibada Day, low and slow, like the sound of ancient drums waking from sleep. The gods had heard the priest's cry, and their silence would soon end. The morning after the party, the sun rose over Lagos like liquid fire. The city buzzed, but inside Kola Adewale's empire, something unseen had begun to stir. It started subtly, a phone call from one of his oil sites. "Sir, the wells are empty," the voice trembled. "They just stopped flowing overnight." Kola frowned. "Impossible. Drill deeper." By evening, a second call came. Another field had dried too. Within a week, every oil well under his company had gone silent. Engineers were baffled. No leaks, no sabotage, just empty ground, as if the earth itself had swallowed its blessing. Kola clenched his fists. It's just business, he told himself. I'll focus on the skyscraper project. But the gods were not done. 2 days later, as he arrived at the grand site of his newest tower, a monument he had named the Adewale Legacy, the unthinkable happened. Without warning, a deafening crack split the air. The ground trembled, steel screamed. The skyscraper crumbled like paper before his eyes. Dust rose into the heavens like a sacrifice gone wrong. Workers fled, the city froze. Kola stood in silence, his white agbada coated in ash, watching the dream he'd built from pride fall into ruin. For the first time in years, fear flickered in his eyes, but pride quickly buried it. "We'll rebuild," he said coldly, "stronger, bigger." Yet, deep inside, something whispered, a voice he couldn't silence. That night, sleep refused him. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of his grandmother. She stood in a field of white mist, tears running down her wrinkled face. "You mocked the ones who gave you breath," she whispered. "Now even the wind refuses to carry your name." He woke up drenched in sweat, gasping. By morning, 3 major investors had pulled out of his companies without explanation. News channels buzzed, stocks crashed, his empire trembled. And as Kola stared at his reflection in the mirror, he no longer saw the untouchable billionaire. He saw a man hunted, not by rivals, but by something older, something unseen. From the shadows, thunder grumbled again, distant but coming closer. The gods had begun to collect. The empire of Kola Adewale was collapsing, but instead of humbling him, it hardened him. Every day brought new losses. Contracts vanished, workers resigned, and foreign partners distanced themselves. But Kola could not see his own arrogance. He saw only enemies. He stormed through his offices like a wounded lion, throwing files, breaking glass, and shouting at anyone who dared speak. "You're all useless. Do you know who I am? I built this from nothing. No god, no man can destroy me." His employees bowed their heads in silence, fear thick in the air. Many whispered that the curse had begun, but none dared say it aloud. That evening, Kola appeared on national television. Sitting in his golden chair, he faced the cameras with cold pride. "There are rumors," he began, "that my downfall is from the gods. Lies. There are no gods, only fools who believe in fairy tales." He leaned closer to the camera, his diamond cufflinks catching the studio light. "To that old priest who came to my house, if you're still alive, hear me well. I am the god now, the god of success." The interview spread across Africa like wildfire. The internet roared. Some mocked him, others pitied him. But in every village, elders shook their heads. "He has spat on thunder again," they said. And thunder does not forget. But Kola didn't stop there. A week later, he unveiled his most arrogant project yet, a golden statue of himself, 30 feet high, erected in front of his mansion. Its chest glittered under the sun, arms outstretched like a king of heaven. On the base, engraved in bold letters, were the words, "Man is God." He threw another party that night, music, champagne, fireworks lighting up the sky. Yet as laughter echoed, the air around the statue grew strangely cold. A wind rose without warning, strong enough to topple chairs and shatter glasses. Some screamed, others ran, but Kola raised his glass proudly. "Let the wind bow to me too," he shouted. Above him, thunder cracked, sharp and sudden, splitting the sky. The gods were no longer silent. The sky above Lagos was bruised purple that night, heavy, angry clouds rumbling like drums of war. Kola sat by his glass balcony, sipping aged whiskey and watching the rain lash against the golden statue of himself that stood proudly in the courtyard. He smirked. The world outside was chaos, his empire trembling, investors vanishing, his skyscraper in ruins, yet he still believed himself untouchable. "Man is God," he muttered, echoing the very words carved into the statue's base. "And gods don't fall." His wife, Adora, had been begging him for days to visit their village priest, to seek cleansing, to humble himself before the gods of his fathers. But Kola would not hear of it. "You and that old priest," she shouted earlier. "You speak of gods like they pay taxes. If there were gods, I'd be richer than them." Now, as thunder boomed louder, Adora tucked their young son, Chijioke, into bed, whispering a silent prayer. The child trembled in his sleep, murmuring of fire and screams, dreams that Adora's skin crawled. Suddenly, the heavens cracked open. A blinding flash of lightning tore across the sky, striking down with a roar that shook the entire mansion. In a single moment, the proud golden statue of Kola, his symbol of immortality, was split in two. Flames burst from its shattered base, spreading fast as molten gold dripped like tears of judgment. Guards and servants screamed as the fire roared through the estate. Chandeliers fell, the marble floors cracked, and portraits of Kola melted from the heat. Adora grabbed Chijioke, coughing as smoke filled the corridors. "Kola," she screamed, "we have to go." The gods had heard the priest's cry, and their silence would soon end. The morning after the party, the sun rose over Lagos like liquid fire. The city buzzed, but inside Kola Adegune's empire, something unseen had begun to stir. It started subtly, a phone call from one of his oil sites. "Sir, the wells are empty," the voice trembled. "They just stopped flowing overnight." Kola frowned. "Impossible. Drill deeper." By evening, a second call came. Another field had dried too. Within a week, every oil well under his company had gone silent. Engineers were baffled. No leaks, no sabotage, just empty ground, as if the earth itself had swallowed its blessing. Kola clenched his fists. "It's just business," he told himself. "I'll focus on the skyscraper project." But the gods were not done. 2 days later, as he arrived at the grand site of his newest tower, a monument he had named the Adegun Legacy, the unthinkable happened. Without warning, a deafening crack split the air. The ground trembled. Steel screamed. The skyscraper crumbled like paper before his eyes. Dust rose into the heavens like a sacrifice gone wrong. Workers fled. The city froze. Kola stood in silence, his white agbada coated in ash, watching the dream he'd built from pride fall into ruin. For the first time in years, fear flickered in his eyes. But pride quickly buried it. "We'll rebuild," he said coldly, "stronger, bigger." Yet deep inside, something whispered, a voice he couldn't silence. That night, sleep refused him. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of his grandmother. She stood in a field of white mist, tears running down her wrinkled face. "You mocked the ones who gave you breath," she whispered. "Now even the wind refuses to carry your name." He woke up, drenched in sweat, gasping. By morning, 3 major investors had pulled out of his companies without explanation. News channels buzzed, stocks crashed, his empire trembled. And as Kola stared at his reflection in the mirror, he no longer saw the untouchable billionaire. He saw a man hunted, not by rivals, but by something older, something unseen. From the shadows, thunder grumbled again, distant but coming closer. The gods had begun to collect. The empire of Kola Adewale was collapsing, but instead of humbling him, it hardened him. Every day brought new losses. Contracts vanished, workers resigned, and foreign partners distanced themselves. But Kola could not see his own arrogance. He saw only enemies. He stormed through his offices like a wounded lion, throwing files, breaking glass, and shouting at anyone who dared speak. "You're all useless. Do you know who I am? I built this from nothing. No God, no man can destroy me." His employees bowed their heads in silence, fear thick in the air. Many whispered that the curse had begun, but none dared say it aloud. That evening, Kola appeared on national television. Sitting in his golden chair, he faced the cameras with cold pride. "There are rumors," he began, "that my downfall is from the gods. Lies. There are no gods, only fools who believe in fairy tales." He leaned closer to the camera, his diamond cufflinks catching the studio light. "To that old priest who came to my house, if you're still alive, hear me well. I am the god now, the god of success." The interview spread across Africa like wildfire. The internet roared. Some mocked him, others pitied him. But in every village, elders shook their heads. "He has spat on thunder again," they said, "and thunder does not forget." But Kola didn't stop there. A week later, he unveiled his most arrogant project yet. A golden statue of himself, 30 feet high, erected in front of his mansion. Its chest glittered under the sun, arms outstretched like a king of heaven. On the base, engraved in bold letters, were the words, "Man is God." He threw another party that night. Music, champagne, fireworks lighting up the sky. Yet as laughter echoed, the air around the statue grew strangely cold. A wind rose without warning, strong enough to topple chairs and shatter glasses. Some screamed, others ran, but Kola raised his glass proudly. "Let the wind bow to me, too," he shouted. Above him, thunder cracked, sharp and sudden, splitting the sky. The gods were no longer silent. The sky above Lagos was bruised purple that night, heavy, angry clouds rumbling like drums of war. Kola sat by his glass balcony, sipping aged whiskey and watching the rain lash against the golden statue of himself that stood proudly in the courtyard. He smirked. The world outside was chaos, his empire trembling, investors vanishing, his skyscraper in ruins, yet he still believed himself untouchable. "Man is God," he muttered, echoing the very words carved into the statue's base. "And gods don't fall." His wife, Adewale, had been begging him for days to visit their village priest, to seek cleansing, to humble himself before the gods of his fathers. But Kola would not hear of it. "You and that old priest," he shouted earlier, "you speak of gods like they pay taxes. If there were gods, I'd be richer than them." Now, as thunder boomed louder, Adewale tucked their young son Chijioke into bed, whispering a silent prayer. The child trembled in his sleep, murmuring of fire and screams, dreams that made Adewale's skin crawl. Suddenly, the heavens cracked open. A blinding flash of lightning tore across the sky, striking down with a roar that shook the entire mansion. In a single moment, the proud golden statue of Kola, his symbol of immortality, was split in two. Flames burst from its shattered base, spreading fast as molten gold dripped like tears of judgment. Guards and servants screamed as the fire roared through the estate. Chandeliers fell, the marble floors cracked, and portraits of Kola melted from the heat. Adewale grabbed Chijioke, puffing as smoke filled the corridors. "Kola," she screamed, "we have to go." But Kola stood frozen, staring at the burning statue through the rain-smeared glass. His face twisted in disbelief, as if the gods themselves had just stepped out of myth to touch him. The statue, "It was me," he whispered. Then louder, "It was me!" The next day, news headlines screamed across every channel. Africa's fastest billionaire collapse. Kola Adewale loses empire in 48 hours. From gold to ashes, the curse of pride. The banks had frozen his accounts, citing irregular transactions. His foreign partners cut ties overnight. Within days, all that remained of his once glorious empire were ashes and debts. Kola moved his family into a smaller house on the city's outskirts, but Adiora could no longer recognize the man she had married. He spent nights pacing in silence, muttering to unseen forces, haunted by the priest's words, "Even the gods who sleep will wake to humble a proud man." Strangely, each night brought new torment. The sound of thunder echoed even on clear evenings. Sometimes he saw the priest's face in reflections, in mirrors, in puddles, even in the smoke of his cigar. His sleep was haunted by his grandmother's voice again and again. "You mocked the ones who gave you breath." By the 7th day, he was a shadow of himself, unshaven, sleepless, pacing barefoot in the ashes of what once was his kingdom. The man who once dined with presidents now sat in darkness, staring at his burned palms and whispering into the wind, "Was I not a god?" And somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like laughter. The city that once echoed Kola Adewale's name now spat it out like poison. His posters, once hung across billboards, had been torn down. His face, once smiling on magazine covers, now haunted the evening news, from billionaire to beggar. For weeks, Kola wandered the streets of Lagos in torn clothes, beard overgrown, eyes hollow with sleeplessness. His mansion was gone, his wife and son had moved to her sister's house, and no one, not one of his former friends, investors, or politicians would take his calls. He was alone, truly alone. One morning, he woke beneath a bridge surrounded by the smell of rain, rust, and hopelessness. He looked at his reflection in a puddle. The face staring back was not the god he once claimed to be, but a man stripped bare of everything. The priest's voice haunted him still. "Even the gods who sleep will wake to humble a proud man." And humble him they did. With trembling hands, he picked up a walking stick from the gutter and began to walk, away from the noise, away from the city, toward the only place left where his name still had meaning, his ancestral village in Oyo. He walked for days. His feet bled. He ate what little he found, roasted corn from strangers, water from streams, fruits fallen from trees. He spoke to no one, but the silence around him began to feel sacred, like a prayer. The farther he went from the city, the lighter he felt. When he finally reached the red clay paths of his village, the sun was setting behind the palm trees, painting the sky with the colors of forgiveness. Children pointed at him, "Look, a madman!" But the elders looked closer. Some gasped, "Is that not Kola Adewale, the oil man?" He did not answer. He simply walked toward the small, ancient shrine that sat at the edge of the village, a place he had not visited since he was a boy. There, under the same giant iroko tree, sat the old priest, thinner, older, and frailer, his once bright eyes dimmed by time. When the priest saw Kola, he smiled faintly, as though he had been expecting him all along. "So," the priest said softly, his voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind, "the lion returns without his roar." Kola fell to his knees, tears breaking from his eyes. Baba, I have lost everything. The gods have destroyed me. The old man looked up at the heavens, then back at him. No, my son, the gods do not destroy to kill, they destroy to teach. He reached out a shaking hand and placed it on Kola's head. You built your kingdom on pride. You thought you owned the sun, the rain, and the breath in your chest. But now you will learn that power is borrowed, never owned. Kola wept, clutching the priest's feet. Teach me, Baba. Teach me how to make peace with the gods. The priest smiled faintly. The first lesson, he whispered, is humility. You must rebuild not with gold, but with service. Go to the fields, work with your hands, feed those who hunger. Then, maybe, the gods will remember your name in mercy. That night, Kola slept in the open, under the stars, for the first time in decades. The crickets sang around him, and the wind carried the scent of home. He dreamed not of skyscrapers or gold statues, but of his grandmother again, smiling this time. Now you begin to understand, my son, she said. The gods did not take your wealth, they returned your soul. And when he woke at dawn, barefoot and broken, Kola felt something new stirring inside him. Not power, not pride, but peace. The dawn came with a soft wind that smelled of rain and earth. Kola sat beside the ancient shrine, staring at the ashes of the fire that had burned through his arrogance. His once smooth palms, now calloused from days of walking and hunger, trembled slightly as he held the only thing left from his former life, a gold wristwatch. It was the watch he had worn when he signed his first billion-dollar deal, the same one that flashed under the lights when he mocked the priest on television. A symbol of his pride, and now the last remnant of his fall. He turned it over in his hands, watching how the morning light caught its edges. The ticking sound felt louder than the whisper of the trees. It was as if time itself was asking him what he had done with all the years he'd been given. The old priest, weak but still wise, sat near the shrine, wrapped in a faded white cloth. His breath came shallow, but his eyes, oh, his eyes, still carried the weight of the gods. Baba, Kola said softly, kneeling before him, I have nothing left. No land, no cars, no home. Only this. He held out the watch with shaking hands. It was once my pride. Now I give it back to the gods who gave me breath. The priest nodded slowly. A man's greatest sacrifice is not gold, but the pride that clings to his heart. Yet every journey begins with one step of surrender. Kola looked toward the shrine, a simple mound of red earth with ancient carvings of forgotten deities. For the first time, he didn't see superstition or backwardness. He saw history, humility, and the echo of his grandmother's voice. He rose to his feet, stepped closer to the shrine, and placed the gold watch upon the altar. The wind stirred suddenly. The trees rustled as if whispering to one another. Kola's eyes filled with tears as he bowed deeply, pressing his forehead against the earth. Forgive me, he whispered. Forgive me for mocking what I did not understand. I thought I made myself, but even the breath I boast of is borrowed. I am nothing without grace. His voice broke, raw with years of arrogance dissolving into repentance. The weight of all his choices, the mockery, the greed, the blindness, pressed down on him until he could only weep. The priest began to chant softly in Yoruba, his frail voice weaving through the wind. The language was old, older than Kola's memory, but every word struck his soul like a bell. When the chant ended, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, though the sky remained clear. A single drop of rain fell on Kola's cheek, then another, until a gentle drizzle began to fall. The priest smiled faintly. The heavens have heard. Rain does not fall on the undeserving. It is not a curse, my son. It is cleansing. Kola lifted his face toward the rain. It soaked his torn clothes, washed his tears, and cooled the heat of his shame. For the first time in years, he felt light, as if the burden that had crushed his soul had been lifted. The gold watch gleamed on the altar, its ticking slowing, until it stopped completely. The priest whispered, "The gods have accepted your offering. What dies today lives tomorrow in a new form." Kola knelt quietly as the rain continued to fall, his heart steady for the first time in years. He had once built skyscrapers that touched the clouds, but now he was building something greater, peace with the heavens and peace within himself. When he finally rose, the priest looked at him and smiled faintly. "Go," he said. "The gods have taken your pride. Now give the world your humility." Kola bowed deeply, leaving the shrine, barefoot and soaked, but for the first time, truly free. Months passed since the day Kola Adewale laid his gold wristwatch on the shrine, and with it his pride. The once proud billionaire who commanded boardrooms now rose with the roosters, fetched water from the stream, and worked alongside farmers in the fields. He learned the rhythm of humility, how to live without luxury, how to serve without expecting praise, and how to find joy in the simplest of things. At first, the villagers whispered. Some pitied him, others mocked him. "Is that not the same man who mocked our gods?" they said. "See how the mighty have fallen." But Kola never answered them. Instead, he smiled, bowed his head, and continued to work. Every strike of his hoe in the red soil was a prayer of repentance. Every drop of sweat on his brow was an offering of gratitude. The old priest who had guided him eventually passed on peacefully, but not before leaving him with one final teaching. The gods do not need your riches, Kola. They need your goodness. When you serve others, the heavens serve you. Those words became Kola's compass. He began by repairing the village well that had long dried up. With the help of local youths, he built a simple wooden mechanism to draw clean water. Then, he used what little he earned from farming to buy books for children who walked miles to learn under a tree. Soon, travelers passing through began to recognize him, though many could hardly believe this weathered, humble man was once one of Africa's richest. One day, a journalist from the city came to the village to write about the fallen billionaire who now lives among peasants. When she found him, he was teaching a group of children how to read using sticks in the sand. "Mr. Adewale," she asked softly, "you once owned skyscrapers, private jets, oil companies. Do you not miss all that?" Kola smiled faintly, drawing another letter in the dirt. "I used to think wealth was how much you could buy. Now I know it's how much peace you can keep." The journalist was moved. She wrote an article titled "The Billionaire Who Found Peace." It went viral, but this time the fame did not make him proud. It brought help. Donations poured into the village from people who admired his transformation. But Kola refused to touch a single naira for himself. Instead, he gathered the villagers and said, "This is not mine. It belongs to all of us. Let's build something that lasts." Together, they built a small school, named Ifeoluwa Academy, the love of God. Children who once studied under trees now sat in classrooms filled with laughter and light. Next, he helped establish a community hospital, dedicated to his late grandmother, the woman who had once warned him never to forget the gods who bless. He didn't build monuments to himself this time. No golden statues, no marble walls, just simple structures, humble but full of purpose. And slowly, something changed. The same villagers who once mocked him began to seek his counsel. Young men came to him before making business decisions. Women came to him for advice about their families. Even elders sat quietly as he spoke. He had lost billions, but gained something far greater. Wisdom that could not be bought. The people began calling him Kola the Wise. Whenever they asked about his past, he would smile and say, I was once a fool who thought he was a god, but now I know the only true gods are gratitude, humility, and love. Years later, when reporters returned to see what had become of him, they found not a tycoon, but a teacher. Not a man surrounded by bodyguards, but by children laughing freely. In an interview, one reporter asked, "If you could speak to your younger self, the billionaire who mocked the gods, what would you say to him?" Kola looked into the distance, his voice calm and steady. "I would tell him, power without purpose is poison. Wealth without wisdom is a curse. But humility," he smiled, "humility is wealth that never runs dry." The camera captured his face, older, wiser, peaceful. Behind him, children sang a song of gratitude in Yoruba. The sound of their voices drifted through the air like a blessing carried by the wind. That night, as he sat under the same iroko tree where it all began, Kola looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you." And somewhere, in the stillness of the night, it felt as though the gods, the ones he once mocked, smiled back. "You mocked us in pride," their silence seemed to say. "But now you honor us in wisdom." And so it was that Kola Adewale, the billionaire who laughed at the gods, was reborn not as a king of wealth, but as a servant of grace. Years passed, and the winds of time softened the memory of who Kola Adewale once was. To the children of the village, he was never the billionaire who mocked the gods. He was simply Baba Kola, the wise old man who told stories beneath the iroko tree, whose laughter carried the calm of someone who had made peace with life itself. Every morning, he walked through the schoolyard, greeting the children with a smile. Some would run to hug him, others would wave from the windows of the classrooms he helped build. The hospital nearby buzzed with life, mothers giving birth safely, old men being treated for free, children receiving medicine instead of prayers of despair. Sometimes visitors from the city would come, government officials, journalists, even former business partners, trying to understand how a man who had once ruled the corporate world could now live so simply. He would welcome them with palm wine and roasted yam, then sit them under the same tree where his grandmother once told him about the gods. "I used to think I was powerful," he would say softly, "but power without purpose is emptiness. A man who builds towers without gratitude will one day watch them crumble." One day, a young man, ambitious and well-dressed, approached him after a long conversation. "Sir," he asked, "don't you wish to return to the city? You could rebuild your empire. People would invest again if you just made a few calls." Kola smiled gently, watching a group of children play in the distance. "My empire is right there," he said, pointing at the laughter echoing through the schoolyard. "Those children will grow to build what I never could, a world where wealth serves people, not pride." The young man fell silent, realizing that what stood before him was no longer a man chasing riches, but one who had found meaning. That evening, Kola returned to his hut, a small clay home he built with his own hands beside the shrine. On the altar still lay the old gold wristwatch, its face cracked but gleaming faintly under the flickering light of a lantern. It no longer ticked, but it had become a symbol of time lost and wisdom gained. Kola sat quietly, feeling the evening breeze drift through the palm leaves. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. "Thank you," he murmured, "for breaking me when I needed it, for humbling me so I could see." Outside, thunder rumbled softly, not in wrath, but like a nod of acknowledgement from the heavens. As the night deepened, the villagers gathered under the tree for their usual evening tales. The moon hung large and silver above them, casting gentle light over the crowd. Kola rose to speak. His voice was softer now, older, but it carried weight, the kind that silence itself listens to. "My children," he began, I once believed that wealth was the crown of life. I thought the gods were myths, and I laughed at those who bowed to them. But I was wrong. The gods are not only spirits in shrines, they are lessons written in our hearts. They live in humility, in gratitude, and in love. He paused, letting the fire crackle. The children leaned closer. The elders nodded in silence. The proud man builds his throne on sand, Kola continued, but the humble man builds his home in hearts, and hearts never crumble. Then, smiling faintly, he added, "If you ever rise higher than others, remember to bow lower than your pride. That is how the gods know you still remember them." The crowd clapped softly, but the old man only waved his hand. "No need for praise," he said. "Let your lives be the applause." That night, as the village slept, Kola sat one last time beneath the awoke tree. The stars shimmered like eyes watching from the heavens. The wind whispered through the leaves, calm, warm, peaceful. When dawn broke, the sun rose gently over the village. The children came running as always, but today Baba Kola did not answer their calls. He sat with his head bowed, a soft smile on his face, and the golden wristwatch lying open in his palm, still and silent. The elders said the gods had finally come to walk him home. They buried him under the awoke tree, the same place where his journey began and wisdom grew. The school and hospital stood tall beside it, his true monuments of legacy. Years later, whenever storms passed over the village, lightning would strike the clouds, not in anger, but in light, and the villagers would say, "The gods greet Kola the wise." And his story was told for generations. He was a man who mocked the gods, but in losing everything, he found himself. For the greatest wealth is not gold, it is grace.